Okay, bonjour à toutes et à toutes. Good afternoon, everybody, people in the room, and also the people who are following us via Teams. I'm Barbara de Kok. I'm very happy to welcome you on this open conversation concerning confronting poverty. This is part of a broader Circle seed-funded project, which is called Confronting Poverty, Uniting Disciplines for Global Impact. It's a project where we try to look into how the narratives of politicians, official instances, academia, NGOs, and society at large about poverty, but also about the responsibility for poverty, are intrinsically linked also with the way research, but also policy recommendations and reports about poverty are being conceived. We look in this project both at more national levels within the Circle countries, at a more international level, but also very locally in terms of access to higher education or opportunities for higher education. The project has participating universities from the Circle universities, so UC Louvain, where we are holding this open conversation, King's College London, University of Oslo, Università de Pisa, and also our external partner, Louvain Coopération, which is the UC Louvain NGO. We had the last 3 days workshop with academic staff and students of the different universities, where we try to look into these connections between discourse and poverty. And we're very happy to share today some of the reflections and ideas that we built up during those 3 days. The project runs a whole year, so this is ongoing work. It's not a finalized result, but we're very happy to show these initial results, which were very much also the results of the interaction of different disciplines. We had participants, and it's a non-exhaustive list, of political science, European studies, international studies, economics, history, linguistics, sociology of language, solidarity, education and global citizenship, public health, psychology, law, among others. I'm very happy to first give the floor to the people at the other end of the table, Philippe Ambier of Université Catholique de Louvain and Elisa Sorbello of Università de Pisa.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and welcome everyone. I will present what we have discussed in our group, because we had several groups of working on and discussing on these issues. So what we've done is that we approach poverty not as a substantial reality, but that could be objectively defined in absolute terms, but rather as a social construct that is jointly material and symbolic, and that need to be approached in a relational perspective. So you're always the poor of someone that is richer than you, and you can be richer than someone else. So that's the idea, that it's more a relational reality. We also approach poverty as related to power. And embedded in power structures and power relations. And so it means, and it's consistent with what I've just said, that it's not necessarily approach as a lack of basic resources, but more generally as both the cause and the consequence of a lack of power in general. So power to have access to certain resources, but also the power to stand out for your own interest, the power to see these interests heard, and you see your voice heard by people in power, and even the power to make your own skills or own resources recognized as valuable. So a broader view of what poverty could mean and where it could come from. And so what I'd like to do now is come back to two topics we've discussed the last 2 days, and with having two questions in mind. The first is how and why is poverty constructed as a problem? And second is how the causes and the solutions of poverty are understood. So the first topic concerns the relation between poverty and drugs. This is something we discussed because one of our participants is a nurse and is working in following people people who are on drugs and trying to help them getting access to the healthcare system. And of course, the addiction to drugs is often related to poverty at the same time as caused potentially by poverty, but also as causing poverty if you spend all the or part of the money you have in drugs. And of course, we can imagine that that poverty can create problems such as addiction to drugs. And in this sense, since drugs themselves are viewed as causing societal problems in general, poverty can be framed as a problem related to social order, to an issue of control for the state of its citizens in general. And it's the same somehow if it makes public health, if it is framed as a public health issue, because then also it's a collective problem for the society, not so much for the individuals, because the society can be it can be detrimental for the society to suffer the consequences of people going on drugs. So it's interesting here because it's a first way to understand why it would be a problem for some society that people are poor. It's because when they are poor, for instance, they go on drugs. And then we have a problem, for instance, a problem of security or a problem of public health. And here we see that it's not, poverty is not an issue that only concerns democratic state or liberal state, because in very authoritative regimes, you can have a very genuine and sincere concern with poverty as an issue of social order. So it's important, I think, to see that you have this first reason and this first way to approach and understand poverty. There's, of course, another one which is linked to social inequalities, and that will consider that the problem with poverty and with the relation between poverty and drugs is related to the consequences it has for the people and for their position in society and for the inequalities they will suffer because of these, because of this drug problem, for instance. But at this level, it's important then to see how we, as a society, understand and react to poverty and its consequences, like in the cases of drugs consumptions. And what we see, which is not, very original as such, but still, it's a very strong tendency, is that maybe the answer is to, or the way to frame is to blame the victim, in the sense that these people who are on drugs, they are often considered as the main person responsible for their poverty and for their addiction, consequential, and it's supposedly linked to their wrong choices or bad behaviors, with then a very reductionist view of the causes of poverty and an often simplistic understanding of the complexity of factors that lead people to be on drugs. And second, and consequently, there's also the idea that what the society do to help these people is then not the result of a duty we should have as a society, but more something that is optional, because we are not really responsible for this situation. Then if we help, it's just because we are somehow generous. And so it's always discretionary and optional. Everything we make can be already a kind of extra action and not a required action. Or it is required by other concerns like security issues, for instance. And so I think that because it appears as optional, the state's intervention can also always deemed to be sufficient, because we've already done something, then we're fine somehow, and we see that in many ways that these poverty issues are attacked, is that they are considered as that as soon as we do something, then we can be proud of it somehow, even if we don't go to the real structural cause of this of these issues. And in the case of drugs, it's even more specific, because everything you do can even not only be seen as sufficient, but sometimes as excessive, as already going too far, because it could fuel the very problem you try to solve, because if you help too much these people, they can be even more dependent than they already are, or you can push them, if you don't put them in jail, for instance, and if you don't prevent them from using drugs, you can incite them to go on in this direction. So there is also a very moral aspect in the way we approach poverty in this kind of cases, because one of the issues is to make people have the good, make the good choices, have the good behavior, and so the idea to help them, even if it improves their concrete situation, if it's true, if it's via, for example, consumption rooms or things like that, it's bad because it's encouraging a bad behavior. So you have often this moral aspect that goes even beyond the political process and political effort to improve the situation of the people. And I think that's it's already much more, and I will give the floor to Elisa to talk about the second topic about migration, and I'll come back in a minute, maybe. We'll see.
Or less. Okay, hi, I'm Elisa, and I'm a student from Pisa, and I'm studying international relations. And the second topic that we discussed yesterday was about migration. That is a topic that has particularly interested me in recent times. Well, we discussed about, of course, migration, because I'm Italian, so we have this problem there. But what type of migration? Because we think that migrants are poor person, but sometimes they are qualified. So we discussed about it. And it was, I think, very interesting, because we discussed about different policies that they have here in Belgium, and that we have, maybe the others that we can have in Italy. And we discussed also about different migration, because maybe we can say that we want different migrants that are more like us. But what does it mean? I mean, languages, or maybe for religion. And we discussed about it a little bit. And, yes, I think that it was really interesting, because it's something that interested me since like 1 year. And maybe I can write my thesis about it. And yes, I really like yesterday, because we could, talk about it and discuss about different points of views. Thanks.
Something that I'd like to add about this is that I think it's important to see precisely that it's another way to link poverty to a certain category of people. I mean, people in addiction are a certain type of social group, but migrants are a group which is who is associated with poverty for very different reasons, and also for, I would say, wrong reasons, in the sense that descriptively it's not. I mean, the poor people of the global south that come to the global north, because these people, the massive part of the migration movements go from south to south, okay, and not from south to north. So it means that precisely it's somehow wrong to associate migrants with poverty in that sense. But still, it means that another way to see the problem of poverty is not the security issue, not the individual issue for the people themselves, But here, the problem is not maybe with the migrants' poverty as such, but the fact that these poor people do compete with others for the results we have already had time to share properly. And so it's not poverty as such that then become a problem. It's just that these poor people, or so-called poor people, are just new competitors into into the on the labor market or in the social allowance market or whatever. So it's still another way then to make a link between poverty and social issues, which is different from the other one. So that was it for now and for us for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe and Elisa. Moving on to the next duo, which is Alexander Clarkson and Rosanna Nicosia, both from King's College London.
Hello. Thank you for all for coming. It's been a really, really fascinating event. Before I hand over to Rosanna, I was going to make a few brief points, but from which she's already going to build. First of all, I'd like to thank all the students and colleagues for some really helpful multidisciplinary perspectives. It's very interesting to look at these kinds of issues from all kinds of angles. My own areas of specialization are two distinct areas, are diaspora politics and of course, European security. And I think what's been really, really helpful from the kind of different projects that we've seen over the last few days is all kinds of different ways and different contexts that look at the institutional and social parameters that shape the experience of inequality in everyday life. So what we've discussed a lot is the kind of micro level, everyday life level experiences of poverty and inequality, particularly for diaspora and migrant communities. But I think what I find important, and I think what we've sort of also tried to do in the sessions and group discussions that we've had, is take a look at how macro political, wider geopolitical dynamics can affect these experiences of poverty and inequality in everyday life, particularly for diaspora and migrant communities, but also how responses to poverty and inequality and insecurity, and I'll come to that in a minute, how these pressures also therefore can actually flow back upwards and affect dynamics that have really important macroeconomic and geopolitical crisis dynamics. And I think it's really, really interesting, just three more points. I think it's interesting that we've had these discussions on the day that Donald Trump decided to hurl his tariff bolt of lightning on the rest of the world. I think it's really important to have discussions like we've had to understand what these sudden structural changes can do to people who are real and existing, not some imaginary number on a statistical graph, but what that impact will be on migrants in Sicily, or migrants in southern Italy, or guest with the sons and daughters of guest workers in Germany, or South Asian immigrant or Afro-Caribbean immigrant communities, or East European immigrant communities in the United Kingdom. And so I think one play I've had through all of this is dialogue between different disciplines. I have a lot of colleagues, political economists, now trying to psychologically cope with the information overload of the last couple of weeks of information from the Trump administration, what that means for their trade policy. That's one academic world. I deal a lot with European security. I speak with a lot of people looking at the militarization of the EU borders, EU military interventions operations in places like Libya, or Ukraine, or Sahel. That's another group of people who are interested in dynamics of security and insecurity, which also affect poverty and inequality. That's another room. And then speaking and engaging with this really fascinating group of people today, looking at poverty and inequality. We need more dialogue between these different worlds. They're not insecurity, poverty, inequality, global economic change and development. These are different disciplines and groups of people, but we need to bring them more into the same room to have the kind of dialogues that we've been having in the last few days. So with that kind of sort of attempt to make a plaidoyer for both connecting the local and the micro-political with the geopolitical and the global, and for widening this really already wide multidisciplinary frame that we've had already in our groups, and to say, let's bring in more people into these dialogues from more fields and more areas, I'm going to pass on to my young colleague, Rosanna.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the introduction. So, hi everyone, I am Rosanna. I'm Italian, but I'm a student from King's College, so I studied in London, and I studied policies and governance in Europe. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the University UCL Louvain for hosting this unique workshop. I just said unique because my personal experience is that we don't talk how much we should like about poverty. I mean, at least in the academia world, poverty, the concept of poverty is overlooked. And this is actually my first point of my discourse, because yesterday I had the opportunity to discuss with Barbara about poverty and the way poverty, this concept, is narrated. I think if we talk about poverty, the way we look at poverty is like as byproduct, but kind of, I would say, socially constructed, in a sense that is a result of the way is the result of where we grew up, or the narrative that surround us. And this is something that we just saw yesterday, because we tried to analyze some journal articles about Latin America and the economic situation of Latin America. And the way journalists portray Latin America, or the way they write a title about an article about Latin America, is gonna, we just found out that it's gonna socially construct the idea that we have Latin America, that is a poor country. So sometimes, when someone that we don't know come up to us and goes like, oh, I'm from Africa, I'm from Latin America, I do think, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that we automatically think that that person might be poor, or poorer than us, because we are from European Union, and the European Union is a rich country, is a rich continent, or is a rich area of the world. We are part of the global north, and the global north is the civilized world. So this is kind of like a really Western, I would say Western-centric narrative of that socially construct poverty. And I do think we need to, at least in the academia, I just always saw this, and I think you might confirm, I just always saw this really Western-centric narrative that just define the global north as the rich and the right place where to live, where like, of course, Latin America and Africa are just not the right place where to live, they need help. Why did not be the case? So this was really interesting for me, because me personally speaking, I did have this view in the academia, unfortunately, I would say. And the second point is that I had the opportunity to work with my professor of King's College, that is about migration. So again, migration, generally speaking, is a really broad topic, because migrants could be regional migrants, international migrants, domestic migrants, economic migrants, climate change, climate refugees, or civil war refugees. So migration is a huge topic. And again, when someone comes to you and goes like, "Oh, I'm a migrant," again, you might think that that person is poorer than you, because again, migrants are associated with poverty. But yesterday, what we saw with our professor was that migrants are different. There are different contexts, different countries where they might go. And the example we studied was the Turkish in Germany versus the migrants in Italy. There is a huge difference in terms of these migrants, because those who might be in Germany, the Turkish who might be in Germany, might have like a really easier life in terms of having a new life abroad, and they might even reach power situation. They might even become rich and have like a stable life, like a really good job. This is something that is not possible for migrants at all, and all Italians in this room can confirm. And so I do think that, again, we need to socially review the way we talk about poverty, because apart from the division global north versus global south, migrants are different. They go in different contexts. They go in different countries. They might have like different policies. And the possibilities that are in Germany are not the same possibilities or opportunities that migrants in Italy have. So of course, like a migrant in Germany is not going to have the same difficulties, if I can say that, of a migrant in Italy, because they're different type of migrants, different places where to live. So I just think that the academia world should change, should stop having this global north versus global south like a narrative that is kind of boring, I would say, because it's kind of discriminating. And we should also see how we socially construct the idea of poverty, because in the end, poverty is like is a different notion it's like a notion that differentiates among person by person, person after person. So we really need to just let's say have a break and just start thinking about poverty and with the way we look at it as a society and as individuals. So thank you.
Again, thank you very much, Rosanna. And I just want to reaffirm the point that what we're discussing here is a process of decentering. And that's not necessarily the same as global south, global north narratives or decolonization narrative. Decentering also means decentering our assessment of who has expertise. So if you look at, poverty or security management mechanisms to countries in the Sahel, you're dealing with states like Ivory Coast or Senegal that have highly professional, bureaucratic, military, economic, business, civil society elites that know better that the center of decision making about how we define development, but also how we define military security in the societies should be centered there. They should be the ones who call the shots, and we should be the ones who contribute only when asked. I think the similar discussion to be had about poverty in diaspora and migrant communities. These communities develop their own institutions, elites, power structures. We have to be aware of what's taking place in these communities. We have to decenter institutional frameworks and actually engage with who should call the shots and who should be the center of power in engaging with these societies. So I've always had, I mean, just very honest, I've always wondered whether the way in which decolonization narratives are framed in the West or in the North truly decenter us properly. The aim should be decentering. That should be the fundamental goal in any of these kinds of policy-making process. And thank you very much, Rosanna, for first of all clarifying, engaging with these issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosanna and Alexander. The next duo we're giving the floor is Carla Scaglioni from Università de Pisa and Arjan Petersen from the University of Oslo.
Okay. Good afternoon. First of all, I have to thank the colleague Barbara for hosting this amazing workshop. I'm using amazing because it's not just, it's an experience, I think. If I look at the students' faces, it's not just being here and discussing in academic terms, but is enjoying and experiencing something that sounds pretty different from what they are used to do at the universities. So I'm an economist. I wouldn't define myself as an economist, but here I'm playing this role. So basically my presentation was focused on a way we measure poverty, or we could measure poverty. And I really enjoyed the two groups had yesterday because basically there was female power because there were all two female groups. And by chance, my specific topic was on gender gap regarding poverty, because we are used to think to poverty, but not actually focusing on what poverty means for women, which is something that we should avoid, because data tell us that we have to put more attention how we measure, because we are more focusing on measures that take into account households, families, but they are not counting or taking into account properly the role women have within these social groups. So I come back to some other points I want to share with you, but I want you to give the floor to Arjan, which is next to me.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for allowing me to take the floor. So, yeah, this is, as you said, been wonderful, and I'm very grateful to have been allowed to participate in this. It's been a very diverse experience with so many important perspectives on poverty. Poverty is not a one-dimensional issue. It's, as we discussed yesterday, it's a very multi-dimensional issue, and it relates to so many different parts of society. And we were introduced to this these components of called BES, which takes environmental, health perspectives, education, work perspectives, economic perspectives, social relationships, political and institutional perspectives, and safety perspectives, or personal safety perspectives, into account when it comes to poverty. No, I'm sorry, well-being, actually. But well-being and poverty is very interrelated. And I think we also did focus a lot on gender, because I think you said something very important the first day, that when we talk about poverty, we think in a very collective way. We don't take individuals into account, and women and men are positioned very differently in most societies, I would say, with men being like those with the highest economic income. So or in some cases, women don't even have that income. So this has just been, and I'm from Norway, so I'm from a very like equal society, I guess, compared to a lot of other societies when it comes to gender. But it's been just wonderful trying to reflect in a more international way. And I've talked to students from all over Europe and also outside of Europe this week, and it's just been great. I also think, we also discussed because the concept of equity and sustainability when it comes to well-being, it's just so complex, and the approaches should also be very complex and context specific. That's kind of what I feel we could conclude on after yesterday's session, that what works in one context might be not a very good solution in another. So you have to take the specific context into account and also look at what works well over time. What I think you also mentioned it recently today, like that. Not just solutions that works short term, like actually something that can work over time. Over generations, and generally, it's just been a wonderful experience, I would say, and I could say so much more, but I guess we have limited time. But thank you so much.
We used this word yesterday, glocal, which is global but local. So the idea was to one of the tasks was to implement a policy regarding we chosen one of the topic, and then we discuss how to implement a policy, looking taking into account or thinking about the role of women within the society, how we can support them. So I asked the students to become for a while prime ministers. As you know, in Italy we have one, a female one, and asked them to play as they were prime minister, collecting data and starting from data and proposing a real policy. And it was interesting. That's why we use this approach, which is global, because the framework, of course, is a macro approach. But on the other side, must be also local, so apply to or tail according to what the people, and especially the society and the women, needs to have, or how they should be supported better. So as I said, it was really amazing to have this group of students, and I'm taking with me their enthusiasm and their willingness to become citizens. Because you see, as I always say to my students, it's just, and I think this is a feeling we can share as professor. It's not just a matter. It's not just an academic discussion. It's more to push them or you, as you are facing me, to be aware. So think about storytelling, thinking about how to measure, thinking about having a multidimensional approach. So I think this is what we are all thinking with us. I give the floor to...
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carolina again. So I'm now also giving the floor to Juan Mena from King's College London, and then afterwards I'll wrap up.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to join my colleagues here. Thanks to all the professors and college students that engaged so thoughtfully in discussions that were very interesting and enlightening, and also the organization that make this experience possible. I'm Chilean. I'm a lawyer and doing a master in public policy in King's College London. And I'm mostly interested in understanding the policy process of crime policies in Chile during the last 20 years. Okay. In Chile, I have a slide. Thanks. In Chile, if you can see, the blue line represents the perception of insecurity of Chilean people, and the red line, it's an objective measurement of crime. As you can see, people feel more insecure each year, even though the rates of objective crime are mostly flat and even decreasing. This makes you, it's a puzzle, because people are feeling insecure, but it's not what are actually experiencing, but it's what they are perceiving. So here is related to the topics of this workshop, where narratives and our perceptions of what is poverty plays a big role. I don't have the data here, but if I could add a third line, it would be a green line, that it would be migration. And migration in Chile have been increased, as we say, at the same rate that perception of insecurity. How we are depicting poverty and migration in the public sphere are affecting the perception of insecurity. And that is affecting the policy process. In Chile, since 2005, roughly the 10% of the laws passed by the legislature are crime-related or related to security issues. It's a huge thing that 10% of the whole legislative production is related to one single topic. And this has a real consequences, is that the incarcerated population in Chile have increased constantly, even though the crime rates haven't been decreasing, because what we are doing is putting, for in longer times of period, people in jail, whether by sentencings that are longer, or because the pre-trial imprisonment is easier to implement. That, if we can show the next slide, we can see that the red line represents the percentage of inmates in the Chilean criminal system, and the blue one, again, is the objective measurement. Crime is not being committed more or less. Because of the increasing of imprisonment, we are putting people more time in jail. So this workshop have been very insightful for my research interest in two particular dimensions. One is more theoretical and the other one is methodological. The first one is related to symbolic domination. Something like imprisonment needs a lot of legitimacy. If you think about prison, you're putting a person into jail, restricting basically all their human rights. Not all, but most of them. It's a very humane practice if you look at all just like in a material perspective. So we have to build a lot of social constructs to make it legitimate and acceptable for society. And we do it a lot. As I told you, we have been doing in Chile this constantly during the last 20 years. So here's where narratives and symbolic domination plays a key role to understand how we are creating criminal policies to address other kind of issues like poverty or migration, which I would say that are very related or even proxies each other. And then the second part of the theoretical or analytical frameworks that we engage during this workshop is the systematic discourse analysis. If we understand that the narratives that are dominating our public sphere is creating and affecting the public opinion, and then our preference, and then how we are actually designing our policy process, detangling who is speaking about poverty and crime, who is targeted as the criminals, and what is the causes and responsibilities related to crime is a key issue to being able to understand the real mechanics operating in the agenda setting of the policy process. And I would end saying that in Chile, when we talk about crime, we are talking about poor people. When we are talking about crime, we are talking about migrants. Nobody is saying that criminality is increasing is thinking on financial fraud or extortion or other kinds of criminality that are very pervasive and have huge impacts on GDP and development and corruption. It's very a well-studied phenomenon. But when in the public sphere we are thinking on crime, we are thinking in poverty. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Juan. So as Juan already indicated, we also discussed yesterday how text, newspaper articles, policy papers, etc., on topics related to poverty formulate the situation. And I would like to briefly take you through 4 elements. First one is who gets a voice in these articles and who is being talked about. Second one is which causes are being mentioned and which not. How explicitly are they also being mentioned? Which kind of argumentation is brought in? And finally, are solutions being talked about, or which kind of solutions? In terms of who gets a voice and who is being talked about, we looked into 2 case studies. One was, it's been already referred to by some of the previous speakers, looked into one set of texts that dealt with poverty in relation to Latin America, and another set of texts that dealt with period poverty, which is the fact of not being able to afford buying menstruation products. When we looked into the text about poverty in Latin America, the voice was mainly given to international organizations, governments, also some scientific organizations working on climate, because we saw that poverty in that context was often discussed as related to extreme weather events, hurricanes, floods, etc. The concrete people living in poverty were not given a voice and were even also not often talked about. It's really at the very macro level that was being discussed in these articles. In the set texts about period poverty, we saw a more mixed view. We had NGOs getting a voice, public health officials, also some companies that sponsor actions to offer menstruation products. We, however, did not hear the voices of people who menstruate in the articles. They were being talked about, but not given a voice. And as one of the public health students pointed out, the men were not talked about at all, only as leaders of governments and as companies. But obviously, it's also important that also men are involved in the whole issue. If we want, both because decisions about budget in families are taken by various people, not only by the people who menstruate, but also at a societal level. If we decide we want to give financial means or logistic means to this issue, then it is important that this is something that is supported by society as a whole and not only by people who menstruate. In terms of causes, we saw that the human impact on causes of poverty was frequently left implicit, as this was especially true for everything that was related to these meteorological events. There are, of course, elements that are beyond our control, but we know that climate change impacts some of these and that we impact climate change. But also more broadly, we also know, and this holds more or less across the world, that people living in poverty typically also live in areas that are more at risk for these extreme events. So this is, again, very much something where humans can intervene. However, if these causes are left implicit, then they're obviously also less highlighted and maybe we're less likely to address them. So this was something that very much struck us in all these texts. Then something I had maybe paid less attention to as a linguist, but luckily we had some economists in the room to point it out, was the pervasive presence of numbers. In almost all of these texts we get statistics, all sorts of statistics. As Carla and Ariane already commented, you can wonder about some of these indicators, whether they are valid, but even leaving aside this very interesting discussion, there were some other things. They obviously have their use, they're part of the argumentation, they're often meant to make things more concrete. If we go to this idea of period poverty, we see that in Canada, UK, Belgium, typically 1 out of 6 people who menstruate have sometimes difficulties to afford menstruation products. So it helps people to get a concrete idea of what is going on. It also gives some kind of objectivity, which can be more likely to convince people. But very often when we were discussing the text yesterday, we also felt that this statistic information was actually not complete enough to be really explicative. We often had things saying like, $10 million is being given to. That's obviously a lot of money. But on the other hand, if you have no idea of how many $1 million would be needed to really solve the problem, then we don't really know what these 10 million represent with respect to the solutions we're aiming at. So this was also a discussion that actually came back in the both groups, and that was very interesting, and maybe also something to think about for people who write policy papers who are involved in this. Now, we had as a title for this workshop that we would look into for this conversation, to new routes to fight poverty. So we've also been thinking a bit about possible solutions. Various people already mentioned that the people involved are not always very visible in the discourses. This can mean two things. It can mean that they're maybe not sufficiently involved overall, or maybe they are involved, but they're still not made visible. Which can be linked to implicit views, also to taboos, still related very much to the fact of living in poverty. So this visibilization of the people concerned, this real involvement of the people concerned, is something that's very important. It's also very close to the work of our external partner, Louvain Coopération. And secondly, in the text on period poverty, one of the texts mentioned the concept of period dignity. And to the group who was discussing, we all thought it was very illuminating, because it obviously completely shifts the focus from the lack of access and the problem rather to the solution, to where you want to go to, not to the difficult situation you're in. And also the term period dignity in itself refers not only to a strictly economic and health issue, but also to everything related to personal identity, to respect for people, and for their well-being in a much broader sense. So this was one of the examples that struck us very much, and that gave us the idea that we could be more careful in the wording, and maybe in that sense also point to its solutions. To conclude all this, Ben, before opening the floor to questions, I think many people already underlined, and it was also very much my impression, that confronting people from different disciplines was very enriching. It sometimes puts things in place that have been nagging you for a while, but you couldn't put the finger on it, and then someone else can put the finger on it. We also have people from many different countries. That was definitely also a very important complementarity. And I also had the feeling that when we were discussing, these connections came very naturally. We were willing to look for them and to see them, but they seemed sort of to come up very naturally from the discussion. So I think it was a really good experience beyond this specific topic, but more for overall discussions, I would like to say. Finally, I would like to point out, as I already said in the introduction, that this project is still very much ongoing. You can see behind me the link to the page where this seed-funded project and also the other seed-funded projects by CircuU are being described, and also further information will be added to this page during the year, so you can definitely keep an eye on that page if you're interested. Well, I'm happy to open the floor to questions. People in the room can raise their hands, and people online can raise a virtual hand. We'll be happy to take questions in English, but we can, among all of us, also deal with questions in many other languages. I think we've got French, Italian, Norwegian, German, Spanish, Dutch, and probably some more things covered, but that to start with. So if anyone has a question or would like to make a comment, add something, then please feel free to let us know. Give people some time to think online. Yeah, okay, David, go ahead.
So I was also involved. Thank you. Anyways, so I was also involved in the conference, which I enjoyed very much. One impression, in addition to all the discussions we had, is it's kind of the thing where you answer one question and you have another two after. So I think that's kind of where I'm getting towards, is in a topic so complex and complicated, are there actual solutions that we can generalize across borders. And a topic as complex as poverty and the globalized and local approach. I think that's what we got to as well, is that it just leads to more questions as well, which I think is also the point as well. But if anyone has perspectives, thanks.
Can't really see well with this long table. Anyone has ideas? You go. I think in any case, I'm sorry? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I think you pointed something that was very much present also in the discussion. Some people are in disciplines that focus very much on the macro level and the broader solutions, and then others have been much more in the individual approach. And it was interesting that the people in the individual approach felt that they should have looked more, that they took from this workshop that they should look more into the global solutions, and the people at the macro level thought they should look more into the individual level. So it probably means that we should be somewhere in between, and probably above all going back and forth. I think you can't really do one without the other, and it's I don't have to start reinvent everything from zero. You can try to build on existing experiences or on existing solutions, but definitely also keep in mind what has been said about context specificity. A simple copy-paste is probably not working. Yeah.
I think also it's one of the things I think it's been important to underline is the extent to which we tend to separate different debates, and I think that's not helpful. So we have an inequality or a poverty debate, and there's a security debate. Without security, there is no space to deal with poverty and inequality. Without dealing with poverty and inequality, you can't develop the conflict resolution mechanisms and stabilization mechanisms that you need to enable security. So I think that's also one thing that's worth doing. And it's really, those dynamics are really something that are context specific, but also require a lot of drilling down to developments on the ground. And, you know, and especially talking and listening. Remember, I think several people said in my group and other groups, so much of this is about talking and listening to people. And you can't develop security management strategies if you don't work out how people define security. Like what makes you feel secure? The absence of violence does not mean peace. That's I think one of the key dynamics. And without peace, you can't start tackling poverty and inequality. And also definitions of inequality. Inequality, we tend to too often think in terms of financial earnings power. Inequality can also mean lack of power. Right? You can have a bit of cash in your pocket and still feel deeply unequal if you do not control the environment around you, which again leads to the way these issues are intertwined. So I think that's also issues that we discussed in different groups. And the aim of the different groups was to look at these things from different angles and different disciplinary contexts, right? So I think that's also something that I think is important to draw with us in terms of, you know, if you want to solve poverty, you have to figure out why people think they are poor. If you want to solve security, you have to figure out why people think they're insecure, and that means talking and listening to people, and not just coming in from Planet Brussels.
Just a few words from my side, the economic side. Well, of course, you don't have a solution. I mean, that's why we introduced that word local, because, I mean, especially when you think about indicators, you can have macro indicators that can work for certain type of countries, for instance, that share the same characteristics, but then you have to go local. You have to apply the macro idea to what you experience. And this happens most of the time. I mean, I would say always, not most of the time. Even when we think about, I can bring you our example of measurement of well-being in Italy. It's not by chance that we have well-being measure on regions, which is a set of indicators that can be measured across all the Italian regions, but then you have also well-being for local territories. And the indicators are completely different. So you have a macro area, a macro dimension. So that's why I'm saying local, because we have to think in terms of multidisciplinarity, multi-dimension, but then we have to have a look to the reality, to face the reality, to ask people, to listen to people and to the different realities we are facing. I mean, your field is economics. You know that we are social scientists. Doesn't mean that we are. I mean, we always say it depends. That's why it's not by chance again. So you have to be flexible. I think this is another word we can take home, to be flexible, to be open-minded, to be open to different solutions, and to embrace different dimensions. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to add one single thing, building on Alex's response, and that lots of structural things on academia prevent approaching things like that. Having your career measured by papers that are at the best like 10,000 words that have to be published in very specialized journals makes you to have a narrow point of view. Like big books proposing systems of thoughts are very rare nowadays. They were like the rule 100 years ago. So that's the reason that spaces like these, initiatives that these are so good, and I really appreciate it, bringing professors from disciplines so different together, thinking about multidisciplinarity in a real way, like not quoting another person, but engaging in real discussion. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. Do we have, in the meantime, another question or suggestion? We'll have a look whether there's someone online. No. In the room? Okay, and we'd like to thank everyone, and so you can go enjoy the sun outside, because we actually do have wonderful weather in Belgium today, which was the extra silver lining for the workshop. Thank you so much for joining and for attending.